right, coming at you all the way live from the lower bottoms of West Oakland. This is Soundwaves. And unbeknownst to anyone listening right now, I had a bevy of audio issues before this started. And now they have been worked out. And I feel a hell of a lot better about my audio issues. What we're going to talk about, don't feel so good about. Today I have on reoccurring guest, friend of show. I'm trying to get away from having him as a guest and just having him as part of the show where he can like host the shows on his own. Kelvin Martinez.
Hello.
What up?
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me back. Your music is always getting me so pumped to have this conversation. It gets me so awake. Love it.
That was a song that was written for our Brazilian tour, which has been exactly a year ago. We went to Brazil and Lula da Silva was locked up.
Oh, wow.
And we kind of wrote this little mini EP in honor of him. And actually, while we were there, right before we left is when the Intercept piece broke of the Sergio Moro leaks to the prosecutor that ultimately freed him.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's cool.
So that was, yeah. That song has a deep meaning for me as well, as loud as it is.
Oh, leftism in South America it's just a whole different ballgame than what's going on here.
Hella different ballgame. Hella different ballgame that we think we know, and you don't really know till you go down there.
No, it's really a whole different conversation also, because I think people just have such different experiences, like with their families and different policies and regimes and whatnot, and it seems like it's hard to suss out from where we're at, and there's so much like just national propaganda that we have to sift through.
Jesus.
Oh, hard,
Speaking of that, side note, that's actually one of the things that we're trying to do. We're actually going to be making little videos for people that sign up through Patreon. We actually are making little videos called Revolutionary Histories. And we're going to have different professors and activists speak on things, like you said, they're always seen through, we always have to see it through the American kind of imperialist propagandist lens.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine hearing about Chavez's Bolivarian Revolution from Gloria La Riva.
Right. Wow.
Or hearing about how China came to be from a professor of Asian studies that's also a socialist. So doing more of those, we're pretty excited about.
Yeah, that'll be cool. I mean, I feel like that is in so many ways. I mean, it's just like, it's so hard to get outside of the narratives that we're just like steeped in. And I feel like that's really part of what's been so impactful about Black Lives Matter right now is like, they've been saying the same thing since Ferguson, and really the Black liberation movement has been saying the same thing forever. And it's just like something about this moment in the coronavirus and people paying attention to Twitter and the media in a different way is like, and just also just the horrible video of George Floyd, I think has really been narrative breaking. Like, it's just shattered sort of like our understanding of what like life in America is, especially as like, oh, we shut down the economy, which I think people never would have thought was going to be a possible thing, And so I think that just to have like this narrative from a different perspective is so powerful. And it just, I mean, it always reminds me like just how steeped in white supremacy everything is. And even my own mindset is like, I have to be cautious about the narratives that I'm taking in, internalizing, and who I'm believing, because who knows where these things are coming from,
Mm-hmm.
Paul Krugman, for instance, is he's a renowned economist, but what does that even mean? It just means that he's kind of supported by the establishment. I'm sure that, he knows much more about economics than I do, but we don't share the same values. And so, that's just one of those things. Like you can't just believe what you're reading in the New York Times because it's steeped in a power dynamic that's always self-perpetuating. So I think that'd be really powerful to hear these assessments from people who just have like not the mainstream perspective on things. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, dude, we've been talking about it for a minute, and to get it going was kind of hard. We're doing all the video editing ourselves. We're a little bit above novice level. So it's been hard to do that, but to have a visual history that kind of is going to be an introduction to just this left perspective of these things that we kind of don't know about. Most people, when they hear Cuba, they think it's some crazy dictatorship. Same thing with Venezuela. Yeah. Same thing with or Russia, or even the old Soviet Union. So to have histories of those things, I'm pretty stoked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm always reminded with those conversations, like how nationalism just ends up becoming sort of like my team versus their team. Like, we have to be critical of the state, no matter who the state is. Like we can't just assume that the Russians are the bad guys is the new like DNC back into the Cold War, and it's like, I don't know. America looks a lot like Russia does right now, and
thank you.
And both of them, I don't think either one of them seem particularly like the quote unquote good guys. So
in the land of freedom, right? We had to have a Supreme Court decision to protect a woman's right to choose. I don't know if you saw that whole Louisiana. It was one hospital in the state where people were supposed to be able to go get an abortion.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Completely nuts. Yeah, I mean, I struggle with these Supreme Court decisions in general because, like, there's a big win for DACA. I guess it was last week.
Yes.
And I'm so glad that people, are going to have a little bit more breathing room. But also at the same time, I'm like, who are these Supreme Court justices to have any say over these people's lives? They're people, they're human, they're living, breathing people in our country who are benefiting our communities, who have families here. Like, it's just such an authoritarian regime, and it's just very hard to sort of like shake Americans out of glamorizing this idea of the American state. And it's not specific to America. It's just, that's what state power is in general. It's these power dynamics, like controlling other people's lives.
I think the problem is they see state power as like having to wear your mask at the Piggly Wiggly or the
right.
Like the Walmart,
You're right.
Which I feel like that's happening by you a lot more than it's happening up here.
Yeah, I mean, there's, this is really revealing. I think the current circumstances are really, it's shaking things up, and it's really revealing sort of the corrosive elements that are just ready to come out. I mean, Beverly Hills still has a curfew, and they're enforcing it, strictly against protesters. And it hasn't had a lot of media coverage. But of course, like, what are they doing? They're just saying, this area is going to protect these very wealthy individuals. And they have the sort of like localized governmental ability to do that. And they don't have to sort of abide by the same rules that the rest of the city does. And so, yeah, we have lots of folks in Orange County, and people just right here in LA who have these kind of right-wing mentalities that is I don't know, I guess it's obfuscated by the fact of being in Los Angeles. Like somehow that makes a person have a good perspective or a right point of view or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, I mean, it's just it's a farce. It's just a complete fabrication of reality. And I think I'm glad a lot of this stuff is coming out because we can see how fascist so many of our local elected officials are right now. I mean, they're smiling while there are people dying on the streets, and they're smiling while, you know, thousands of people are getting infected by coronavirus because they want bars to be open. Like, are you kidding me right now? Like, it's incredible. It's
And I understand to a certain point, like, I understood people's fear when everything shut down and their money got short.
yeah.
I definitely understood that fear. I definitely think that it was harnessed it all wrong. You know, guns at Capitol buildings was silly.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless or not if that was AstroTurf, there definitely is a segment of the population that just doesn't. They don't like the lockdown because they see the effect it has on them personally, the effect it has on their wallet personally. It was so hard to get through to unemployment.
Yeah.
If you needed to file, and now people's $600 is coming due, like it's done. Now we're about to see the first wave of evictions and foreclosures.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Scary.
who's going to take advantage of this? The people that took advantage last time are literally in the White House.
Yeah.
Right? Donald Trump and Steve Mnuchin literally made billions off of the 2008 housing crisis.
Yeah.
And buying those homes, or banks, if you will, for pennies on the dollar. So we might be seeing, what is it, 45 million Americans have filed for unemployment since the lockdown for COVID. That doesn't include all the other people that were without a job. And we're looking at, was it 480 some billion dollars that the top 0.1% has made during this lockdown. We had a bailout bill that bailed out no one other than these rich industries that are all, like Boeing got bailed out, and they already said we're going to lay off like around 12,000 people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the whole Boeing deal seemed like a whole mess because wasn't initially the plan. The initial sort of offer was that they would get a bailout, but that the government would then have some shares of the company, right? Like a
Mm-hmm.
certain amount of control. And they were like, oh, yeah, then we don't want the bailout.
Yeah.
And then I think that they've worked it out some other way now that, of course, it's going in Boeing's favor.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like a totally, I said the Supreme Court is authoritarian, which I think, you know, some people might say that that's like overstepping, but I feel like authoritarianism is just an approach to governance that is much more pervasive than people kind of recognize. And I think it's really come out in this coronavirus situation where, even just here in LA, there was a stay-at-home order. So basically, you have an elected official saying you have to stay at home. Where there could have been a collaborative approach that would have the same outcomes. That would look more like, we're going to make sure that everybody has what they need in order to be able to stay at home. And we're even going to incentivize people who stay at home. If you stay at home, then you get some sort of, tax credit, or maybe you get even, rental assistance or whatever the case might be. That, is really saying like, you have the right to do whatever you want, but we want to collaborate with you to make sure that you can make the safest decisions for yourself and for the community. But instead, what we have is a bunch of elected officials who look like fraternity guys, Eric Garcetti. I mean, I don't know,
I know what you're talking about.
telling us that what we can and cannot do. And I think that is really, I mean, and now I'm starting to sound like one of these right wingers, right? Like, don't tell me to put my mask on or whatever. But I think my point is just to say that, like, we're being treated through this paternalistic lens that these elected officials seem to think that we're all adolescents who need to be told what we can and cannot do, rather than saying, hey, we're all a team. Let's work together to make sure everybody is taken care of in these very serious circumstances. And so, we could have had, rent cancellation, mortgage cancellation, and incentives to stay at home, and really dealt with this thing aggressively in a matter of a month or two. Instead, what they've done is tried to have as little change as possible, made sure that the people at the top are having the fewest economic repercussions as possible, and putting the burden on the people who are struggling to pay rent. So now there's like this rent relief program that Garcetti and the LA City Council has been working on, but really all it is a landlord relief program, because it's renters having to apply for this program. Basically, they're stuck at home doing white collar work on behalf of their landlords, applying for these things for money that they're not going to see, just to put it straight into their landlord's pockets. And you can really see that, like, the working class is just being treated like wage slaves.
Like fodder.
Absolutely. I mean, like, when they've restricted, these unemployment benefits, so that if your work is open, you can't really take the unemployment like you could have before. There's no longer an option to stay at home. Even if you feel unsafe at your workplace, you have to go in order to pay your rent. That's not a choice. That is a whip, So yeah, I don't know. It's very frustrating. It's very dark to watch these local elected officials, and it's happening all over the place. I mean, it's happening from the federal level on down, but just to watch these fraternity frat guys treat businesses like they're real constituents, and treating the rest of us like we're just the help, But I know that's off track of what we were.
No. It is, but it isn't. Like, it's frustrating to see working class people be used as fodder for the capitalist machine.
Yeah.
And then kind of defend that same machine as they're being just grinded. Hey, you're just the meat in the grinder right now.
Yeah.
And it's like, what is it going to take for cats to realize that this is all bad?
Yes, all bad. Absolutely. I mean, the issue is, and this is something that I feel like our elected officials do not have very much of a conscious understanding, is that the working class is the most important element of our economy and our functioning country. Like, working class people are the people who make this country work, and they are being put in danger, and they're being exploited and abused on a daily basis, and those workers are disproportionately Black and brown, and it's just a train wreck to watch. And I'm really hoping a lot of I think we're already seeing so much solidarity come out of it, with so many strikes going on, so many tenant unions kind of like really taking the advantage to like take power and protect people from getting evicted illegally. I think that this train wreck is maybe what we really might have needed to happen to protect the rights of the working class. Although right now, they're getting the shaft, but I think it's going to start waking people up. I think, especially as you mentioned, as these eviction rates start to come up, We've already seen the just the complete vicious brutality of the police against these protesters, and just all these lynchings going on all over the country, that it's going to be very interesting to see how law enforcement responds to these evictions. Are they just going to come to people's houses and throw them out? I mean, what is that going to look like on a national scene? What's that going to look like when everybody is video recording cops dragging people out of their homes? We'll see.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think that's going to be where the pushback is going to come from. With law enforcement being under a severe gun right now, and they're and still kind of acting a damn fool. I don't know if you saw in Detroit not too long ago. Was it a couple days ago? They were having some protest, and a Detroit SUV cop car just mowed down a bunch of protesters. And
they can't help themselves. It really seems
they really can't. They really can't.
Body cams, cell phone footage, it doesn't matter. They seem to know that they're not going to have any repercussions, so they do not care. I mean, there's video of police brutalizing protesters yesterday in New York, or it actually might have been this morning. I might have woken up to this on Twitter. But yeah, I mean, sorry, but you were saying.
No. It's just I want to know what would be the reaction when you see law enforcement, who's already pretty hated right now, and we're calling to defund them for the first time since ever, right? Evicting a working class family out of their house. Yeah. Like throwing this, like you said, if someone's recording it and they're locking they're putting the padlock on there so they can't get out. They're throwing their stuff out in the front yard. What is that going to do? Because we saw with the Moms for Housing out here in Oakland, actually down the street from where I'm speaking to you now, when the police came in their riot gear and their armored vehicles, there was such a backlash that the company that owned the house was like, you know what? Fuck it. Just take it. We'll sell it to the city's fucking land trust. We can't deal with this bad press.
Yeah. Yeah. I have no idea. I mean, I'm really hoping that what turns out is more people opening their hearts and having some compassion for the people who are not being taken care of by this system. I mean, this system was built on exploitation of the working class and of Black and brown people, on women, and I think it has hardly been working in general. I mean, it's been working for a very few at the very top. But I think now, especially with how coronavirus has just thrown this whole system into even more turmoil, I think it's become apparent that this system cannot really last in this environment. That the rental system specifically is just becoming so absurd. Because before there was sort of this sense of like, if you can't pay your rent, you need to go find a job. And now there's sort of this realization, hopefully, that actually there aren't any jobs to go get. And there's not a lot of hiring being done. And the jobs that are out there to get are putting people in danger. So I think it's kind of revealing just how kind of cruel it is. I'm hoping. And I think it is, because at least the conversations that I'm having with people and that I'm seeing people pay attention to are the same conversations that activists and a lot of leftists have been having, but now there's a lot more eyes on it. I tuned into two separate local committee meetings for elected officials. This was a county board of supervisors and the LA City Council, and both of them just had so many people calling in, and that just wasn't the case a few 4 or 5 months ago. There were people calling in, but it wasn't at all with the same amount of emotion and conviction and the same amount of organization. And I think that we're really seeing some sort of awakening happening. And maybe this is, maybe this is my rose-colored glasses here, and maybe it's just something I'm hoping for also, is some sort of deep, personal, spiritual awakening across our neighborhoods, across our communities, from home to home, from person to person, where we can look and we can recognize our own instability in this system and see another person suffering and realize I am intertwined with that person's suffering. That person's suffering is my suffering, and we're in this together. And I think we're really seeing a division also where, the cops, the police have been showing how they are the force that's trying to divide people. That is, they're the other side at this point. I think they're just the front lines of the other side. Of course, it's the entire capitalist system, but their foot soldiers are law enforcement. It's the people there to enforce this system of exploitation. So, yeah, I don't know. That's some hopeful thinking, but I do feel like some of it is the pulse of what's going on, and who knows what the response will be. But I see a lot of potential in what's going on, and I know that it's coming at the cost of a lot of misery and suffering, and I hope that we can pull together to have some support for one another and mutual aid and just solidarity in general. I don't know. What's your pulse?
That's the goal.
Yeah.
We always hope that. I mean, the Bay Area is a little different because the police have a little bit more to lose here, and I can't speak for everyone that's ever had an encounter with police, and definitely I'm talking to you from Oakland, who's had quite a few scandals with their police force, from a child, she was like 17-year-old prostitute that was getting passed around police departments so much that it took us like 6 or 7 months to get a police chief in here. We also had a scandal similar to your Rampart scandal, where we had police officers planting dope on people literally outside of where I'm talking to you. We had Oscar Grant. That was our public transportation police, but still law enforcement nonetheless. Mm-hmm. So we definitely have had our problems with police, but I can honestly say, being a Black man that has traveled, there's some places where police are way worse. Yeah, LA is one of them. New Orleans is pretty bad. New York is horrible.
Yeah,
horrible. The middle of the country is horrible.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you're speaking to also the fact that, like, Oakland seems to have a social consciousness that I can only hope is spreading to the rest of the country. There's just so much activism and perspective that's come out of Oakland. That's, I'm just thinking of Angela Davis and
mm-hmm.
Even Tupac claimed Oakland. So
yeah. But Angela Davis was here recently. She lives here, but she did a big protest when they shut down the ports. Throughout the whole West Coast, in solidarity with shutting them down on the Gulf, I think.
Uh-huh.
I'll tell a true story. This is a true story. So Kelvin and I both deal with the unhoused communities. I still work in a shelter. I had a run-in with law enforcement recently at the shelter, where a person that was being violent with a much older client, I had to break up a fight. That dude didn't like it and wouldn't leave. We just wanted him to leave for a day, calm down for a day. And he wouldn't even calm down for the day. And I thought security had got him off the grounds, but they didn't. And another employee didn't know what to do, so they just called police. I will say this. Oof. A lot of people call police when they don't know what to do with somebody, when they don't want to deal with someone. They just call law enforcement. It's frustrating because law enforcement doesn't want to deal with mental health issues. Maybe that's why so many mental health issues in a gunshot wound to the mentally ill. I can't answer that question. I'm not in the heads of those officers. But the system of policing doesn't really lend itself to being a good mediator in any sort of mental health, homeless issue. The person who was the aggressor in the fight said that I had assaulted them and the police were trying to give me a citation and I wouldn't take it. And after an hour of talking to police, they finally said, "All right, fine. You didn't assault anybody. We understand what happened." But it took an hour. And they definitely deal in a world of semantics that's not very helpful in these situations. That's just my opinion. Kelvin, do you have any?
It's I just appreciate you sharing the story. I mean, it's I'm Puerto Rican. I definitely pass as white, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just got to say, like, that's not something I've had to deal with, and it, I cannot help. I mean, obviously, it's an issue of race, but it is also an issue of how law enforcement treats homeless individuals
Mm-hmm.
and people with mental illness for sure. I was trying to find the name of this person because I really hate, describing a shooting without having somebody's name. But let me see here. But there's a man who was mentally ill here in California who was rummaging through a trash can at a gas station, and like 3 cop cars show up and are yelling at the man to drop a gun that he clearly doesn't have in his hand. And we're watching this from cell phone footage of somebody driving around the gas station, and they execute this man. I mean, there's no way. It was in San Bernardino, and there's no way to describe it other than an execution. And yeah, I mean, I just, it's hard to fathom. I don't know what your experience with homeless services was before you were working at the shelter, but I had this impression that it's somebody's job to help somebody who's living on the streets or somebody who's having a mental breakdown, somebody who's having a psychotic episode. Before I worked in homeless services, I just thought, oh, there's somebody who's designated to help these people. And when I started working in homeless services, it became very apparent that just doesn't actually exist in our system, in our cities, that we're basically just hoping that those individuals calm down on their own, or they're addressed by the police, and then they're sent into the carceral system. And so we have this massive ballooning of mental health issues in the prison system.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's hard to fathom how this has happened this way. But yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that story. I mean, it's I also can't say that it's surprising. I mean, what was your experience of it as you were in it?
I stayed calm. The officer in question was pretty young, to be honest with you, and he was very curt when we were first having our conversation. It's it's not fun to break up fights when you see a person trying to fight the elderly. And I don't just mean old, I mean the person was in a walker and this guy is trying to fight him. And for law enforcement to come up to me and be like, well, this guy says that you pushed him or whatever, and he we call it a citizen's arrest, and here's your citation. And I was like, I'm not going to court, wasting a day of work, and then you set a precedent in here that all people have to say is that they were like touched or pushed or anything, and then you come here and give citations to us workers, then no one will intervene when we have real problems. Like couples are in there. Mm-hmm. They fight. You know, I had to remove someone the other day that had beat up his girlfriend. Mm-hmm. And that's not the first person I've had to remove. I don't have a gun. I don't have a baton. I don't have any weapon. I just have to remove them from the building, trying to cool people down and, you know, get this young lady in a safe situation so she's okay and get this gentleman out of there. And, you know, here you are, you just broke up what could have been pretty bad. And a cop is looking you in the eye and saying, well, it's not a big deal. I'm like, it is a big deal, man, because it costs me money and you make double time. And I literally looked at him. I was like, you make overtime for this. I don't. I lose money for this. And again, you're setting a precedent in this building that makes it really bad for anybody to want to stop a problem. And then you make it where people will, for fear of the legal ramifications, just let an ass whooping happen and then just clean up the mess afterwards.
Yeah.
And that's just not what we want in the facility in general. And that's just not what you want overall. So he kind of got it. Again, it took like an hour. They ended up questioning like everybody involved again. And then they found like, you know, we have enough information. I was like, of course you have enough information. You know, I'm not here assaulting cats. You know,
yeah,
that's
just the complete irony of this police officer coming and trying to cite you for trying to de-escalate and trying to, preserve somebody's safety, where there's just video from all over the country of police officers called to do that very thing and then killing someone.
Yes.
You know, the irony is unmistakable. Being in homeless services, I had a number of weapons pulled on me. There's one time, which I think was the most serious, was that someone brought a knife into our facility. It was a big kitchen butcher knife, and we're clearly looking to pick a fight. They picked a fight with another person who'd come into the facility, and it was terrifying. This person has a knife, and they're screaming at the top of their lungs, and I didn't have a gun, and I didn't have a baton, and I didn't have tasers. All I had was like the mental capacity to talk to this person, and like I was practically whispering to this guy, and I'm just like whispering. I'm talking in the softest voice I can, just trying to like get him to have to like stoop down into like sort of this deeper listening space, that to calm him down. And ultimately what happened was he puts the knife down, and we ask him to leave. We ask him to leave the facility, and that we'll have to have a conversation about when he can come back. And I'm just thinking about how much worse that situation would have been if we had had a police officer on our facility, or if we'd had somebody with a gun at our facility. Because the necessity to de-escalate wouldn't necessarily be there, because that fear would overtake them, and somebody's life would have been lost. Mm-hmm. This guy who pulled the knife, I don't think he wanted to kill anybody. I think this guy had a knife because he's been living on the streets and has had the shit kicked out of him a number of times, and just needs something flashy and showy to get people off of his back. But I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of going on this rampage because I'm just thinking about it, how frustrating it is to watch people over and over get killed, and in a lot of cases, I feel like these are lynchings.
Mhm.
And and to hear officers and to hear people defending these officers uh, based on just like a minor bit of fear in some cases. I'm thinking of Amadou Diallo.
Oh man,
That these four officers get
41 shots.
41 shots. These officers get let off because they said that they were afraid of a man entering in his own apartment.
Hmm.
And it's just, I mean, it's just baffling. It's just baffling. And I think it's hard to understand unless you, I don't know. I really don't even know where to begin to try to understand this.
I can this look. I live in a pretty bad this where I'm speaking to you right now. I just don't like to show a lot of photos. I feel like it's kind of exploitive, but it's the rows of cars people are living in. It's not just like they're parked alongside a fence. There is multiple rows. It's so bad that cats are pretty much in the middle of the street.
Yeah.
And it looks like some shit you see in a movie. There's a big ass barrel, and there's fire coming out of it, and the cars are all blown up because they blow cars up over here. Um, and I've never had a gun.
Mm-hmm.
And people go, man, you need to have a gun over there. I'm like, why? That means I'm gonna have to use it.
Yeah.
That means that everybody's gonna be a threat to me.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these people don't want any trouble. They just want to do whatever the fuck it is they're doing. If they're selling dope, if they're selling ass, if they're just going to work, they just want to do whatever the fuck it is that they're doing, and they don't want to fuck with you in the process.
Yeah.
I park my car out here when I'm here, and I don't have a garage. I don't have a gate anymore. They changed the locks here. We actually had a gate. I parked my car, and they just recently changed the locks, and I haven't linked up with the owner to get the new key. So I parked my car out in front of my door, and it's out there exposed. Nobody fucks with it. Not because I'm a badass. It's just people don't want that level of trouble more often than not.
Yeah.
And when you view everybody through the lens of fear, then everybody's a goddamn assailant.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, did you see these pictures of this couple in St. Louis? You know what I'm talking
Yep.
about?
Yep.
Standing out in front of their house with a pistol and what looks maybe like an AR-15 or something. That
Yeah.
if those people didn't have the guns, they wouldn't have been able to respond with such aggression. And they might have just had to step outside of their house and watch the protesters walk by, and everything would have been fine.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, what we have is something that looks like I don't know. It looks like something out of a mob movie, a mafia movie. That
Like the Purge, maybe. It looks like the
yeah,
Purge.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, uh, and it's stoking all this fear, and I think that yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking back to even sort of the inception of this, the conception of this country. That like there was this debate between the founders of America about democracy,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a number of people who were saying, we can't have democracy. I think it was Madison who was saying that it equates to mob rule. Well, when you see a lot of the documentation of what they're even trying to say when they say mob rule, what they're afraid of is that the lower class is going to they're not going to allow the elite to live in such luxury. They
Mm-hmm.
will prevent them from having acres and acres and acres of farmland where workers have to be working and slaves have to be working. And there was a deep fear of their personal property, as they would think of it, being seized. And I just kind of feel like that's how this country has just been for these hundreds of years. Is is the elite protecting violently their property. And you see it in that couple, and the fear that they have of their $1 million home. There's a picture of them inside the house that is just, it is on another level rich. And that's what the police are, so I mentioned Beverly Hills for that very reason, to say Beverly Hills is afraid of the poor working class. The poor working class is going to recognize how much Beverly Hills is benefiting off of this horrible system of exploitation. And so they need to employ violence. They need to employ basically their security guards, who are the police, to protect them. It just recalls also the whole mentality of the police in America being founded off this idea of slave catchers. That the whole concept of it is for white rich people's property. It's just another level ridiculous when we start to just kind of recognize it for what it is, And like you said, like the area that you're in, it sounds, what somebody might describe as lawless.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't sound like what those people need is an army of police officers to come in there and point guns at everybody.
Exactly.
It sounds like a lot of people in that area are in desperate need. A lot of those people have lost some sense of themselves. A lot of those people have been completely marginalized from their health and from their place in our society. And really what they need is an arm of compassion and a sense that they belong and some help, and having a gun waved in their face or having somebody with a taser standing next to them isn't that. And it's really hard to watch. I think for me, all these folks I know who are staying out on the streets I think I've spoken, literally hundreds of people who have lived in Hollywood on the streets. I would say over the course of my tenure in homeless services, probably a couple thousand.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard people say they need access to more public restrooms. They need access to showers. Yep. They need access to mental health. I've had people tell me, I need drug rehabilitation, but I don't know where to get it. People who are drug addicts, addicted to a substance, and are begging for help and can't figure out where to get it. What I have never heard anybody say is they need more interaction with law enforcement.
No, that's never the response, right?
Never. And so it's just when are we going to start listening to the people who are in need? I've just been, it's so cheesy, but I've just been thinking about how would our system change if we started thinking more trickle up economics, trickle up well-being? And I just know it sounds cheesy, but it's just at the same time I'm thinking these are the people who know this system for what it is, because they have dealt with the policing aspects, they've dealt with the normativity of it, they've dealt with the marginalization, and can really see this system for what it is, because they haven't been allowed to participate. I've been watching, I don't know if you've seen that show, Trigger Warning with Killer Mike.
Yeah, I saw most of them. Yeah.
There's this episode where, he's trying to get the Crips to these guys from the Crips to
make the soda. Yeah.
Soda.
Yeah.
And it becomes so apparent, like, these guys can't get a loan, and they're selling, whatever they're selling. They're selling weed or they're selling oxy, who knows? But they're doing the same stuff that these corporate CEOs are selling. They're selling the same stuff that the cannabis industry in California has been selling. But they can't get a loan for their business. Why? You can say that it's because they're unemployed or whatever, but I think ultimately it just comes down to this narrative does not fit within the white mainstream narrative of what business means or what it means to exist in our society. And those guys have to create an economy for themselves. And that's what they do, you know, and it's just funny to me how we shirk at this idea of gangs, but what is this capitalist system but just a massive it's just gangs on a more macro level, you know. We have the police as the protection, we have, you know, the movers and the shakers, and we have the shot callers, and it's just, you know, everybody's wearing suits and uniforms instead of wearing colors.
I've always viewed law enforcement as a gang.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, totally. I mean, I have not always seen it that way, but I have come to see it that way, especially through my experience in homeless services. But yeah, I mean, you've told me you've come up with, you know, sort of the NWA public enemy
Yeah.
mentality. So, I mean, what's that like to watch this going on and kind of always been in the know?
Right now, I'm at an age right now where I think I'm a little more fearful of what comes next, because 92, we didn't see a building of a strong left. We really didn't see the left do much in 92. It's like maybe they were still in retreat.
Mm-hmm.
And the voices that were heard were the voices of law and order, actually. And it was kinder and gentler than Nixon's Law and Order, but we kind of heard Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
You know, in the aftermath of LA, the riots out there, you get 94, you get 94 crime bill, and you get 3 strikes, you're out.
Yep.
Um,
Now here we have that guy's Democratic nominee.
Yeah, and no one, and I think people kind of know about it, but he's not the face of it, even though he should be. Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. So what I'm more fearful of seeing it in real time is a co-opting of hashtags. We've had to have these, like, I don't know what you call them, not diversity trainings, but these kind of talks about race at work in the aftermath of all that's going on. And there are these Zoom calls, of course, because we can't get together, right? And they become very internalized. They can be a bit of a pity party. Mm-hmm. So I've been going on them and just changing the discussion.
Oh, yeah. What does it change to?
A discussion of systems and power. And freedom, kind of our initial discussion, like, what does freedom look like? And there's a class aspect to everything. It's not just simply race. So when people are like, we need more of this, like, we have more people of color in here, then we can blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, well, maybe. But, you know, keep in mind, you had a black president who had a black DOJ and nothing changed. You live in a state that had a black district attorney, and she went out of her way to put black people in prison. So color doesn't mean that much.
Right.
It's, what are your values? What do you stand for? There's black cops that beat black kids, that arrest black kids. There's black judges that give those same black kids long sentences because the black DA, you know, was the one that prosecuted them. So it's just not, you know, James Foreman wrote a great book, Locking Up Our Own. And I definitely was quoting from it and advising people to read it. But I think we always forget the class aspect.
Yeah.
I think we always forget, like, when you see these monuments come down, if you get too caught up in it, then that becomes the whole conversation. And then it's like, well, they're going to tear down Lincoln's. And now you got a whole news cycle around what monument you should tear down and you shouldn't.
Right.
All these people are problematic to a degree, but there's a huge difference between Robert E. Lee being in the middle of a main street and Abraham Lincoln. Mm-hmm. What's next? You know, the slippery slope people. Are you going to take down, what's the one in South Dakota? I can't think off the top of my head. Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
And it's like, come on, like, stop. This can't be the end all be all of this very awesome time we have where people are literally talking about taking money away from law enforcement
Yeah.
and actually putting it into services for transformative and restorative justice.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to sit here and talk about monuments.
I have a slightly different view.
Okay.
And I'm thinking back to the conversation that we had, I think a couple conversations ago about, I think it might have been the one on freedom. And I remember thinking and saying out loud that I felt like there is sort of this spiritual core missing from what's been going on in the left.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been thinking about that a lot lately and a little bit cringing at myself, to be honest, because I've been seeing this so much through the lens of the Democratic Socialist America and Bernie Sanders and, the writings of Karl Marx and thinking like, oh, what is this missing? This is missing something alive and vital, and I can't tell what it is. And I think that the uprisings right now have, I don't think I've ever been really a class reductionist, but I do feel like I'm feeling a little bit, convicted right now because I feel like I haven't paid enough attention to what Black Lives Matter has been saying for years now, and I haven't been recognizing just the amount of police brutality and police killings that the Black community deals with, and I think that is the core of what has been missing, I think, from sort of the, I don't want to reduce it, but just sort of the more like Bernie Sanders left a little bit. That there's a life element, like that this is to protect lives, that this isn't just about getting a better job and having a better minimum wage, which I think, I'm not scoffing at those things. I think those things are really important. But that we're missing some really crucial elements that like people this week and next week and the next week are going to be killed by police officers because the police officer judged them according to the color of their skin. And then police officers are also going to kill people, who are white. And that I think that like coming back to that life element, that this is a life and death situation, is so much more spiritual, I think, than maybe sort of the call to seize the means of production, which again, I think is so, think is important.
No, I totally get it. No, I totally get it.
I believe in those things, but like, I'm just thinking about the guy Robert Fuller, who was lynched in Palmdale, and just how it shows just how rotten to the core this system is, and policing is, and how so little not enough has changed in the last 60 years. And I guess I was saying that to say I 100% get what you're saying. This isn't to disagree, but to just nuance it a little bit. That I think these monuments, they got to come the fuck down, man. Like we got to get them down because those, I'm thinking about it in these spiritual terms of like, these are the idols that we worship. And these are the images that are telling the history of this country and telling us what we are glamorizing. And there is something really powerful for me watching, in a group of organizers led by an indigenous community pulling down a statue of Andrew Jackson. Something about that is powerful to me because it's like this statue was erected on this land, and now it's getting pulled down. And I don't think that can be the end all be all, but I think that we should take those instances and just like let them stoke our hope and compassion and our hope that the images of this country and the monuments that we believe are worth protecting and erecting, they matter and they influence, and they're taking up physical space in this world and in our country and in our society, that I'm so glad people are saying none of that, no more.
Well,
Not
let me reframe it then,
yeah,
because maybe it came out wrong.
no, yeah, I wasn't trying to pick on what you're
No,
saying.
no, 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 no. Maybe I need to reframe it, because I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. Andrew Jackson is an odious individual, and there's nothing more disgusting than the fact that when everybody wanted him off of the $20 bill
Yeah,
and with replaced with Harriet Tubman, Steve Mnuchin was like, no, 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 that's never going to happen. That says a lot about white supremacy. That being said, I agree with you. There's statues up that don't need to be up.
mm-hmm.
And I understand why people want to take them down. Again, I live in Oakland, California. I don't have those same kind of statues that people in Virginia have and Mississippi have with that Confederate flag flying over their state capital. I've worked in the Gulf of Mexico with cats from Mississippi and have heard them tell a very angry, tear-filled frustration story about they don't understand why that shit's still up. So I totally get it.
Yeah.
What I don't like seeing is when the city paints Black Lives Matter on the street.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. This just the co-opting of this entire, co-opting of the meaning of the whole
Mm-hmm. The city that wants to build another jail, or that is not going to defund their police department, but shift the money in another way. And then maybe you'll get a Black Lives Matter Boulevard. Maybe you get a George Floyd Street, and people get all excited. They're like, yeah, we got the street and we got the sign. And I'm like, look, man, Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard and a lot of places in America is the demarcating line. That street is the demarcating line of race and class.
Damn, yeah. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
don't let the smooth taste fool you. Yeah, right. Don't let the smooth taste fool you. It can be nothing more than window dressing, and where this movement is really making strides to nationally change the conversation and to make us somewhat comfortable with this change. Because I don't know of one American that thinks that when you have a mental health issue, the police should be there.
Yeah.
If you have a spousal issue, I'm not talking necessarily abuse, but I'm talking people fighting and then someone calls the cops.
Mm-hmm.
Like, somebody's going to jail.
Yeah.
You're in the system now. Everything's going to be a lot more difficult. Now, what if a real counselor came out there to deal with your issues?
Right.
Being able to reimagine that, I'm sorry to cut you off, being able to reimagine that and have that be part of the conversation, I love that. But when we have to argue about should we take down George Washington and the slippery slope guys start talking on Fox News, and then all the people want to, because it's emotional. So you want to react to that, and then you got a week of the slippery slope guys changing the subject.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree with what you're saying. And because it's just so easy for them to rile up their bases according to these. But I think back to something that I wanted to mention real quick was that I 100% agree with what you're saying. I think that the tangible change that Black Lives Matter is calling for of defund the police as a step, as a real step that they want to start seeing as a value in cities and communities, which is just the first step of many towards abolition. Mm-hmm. But I think it's really cool that maybe it's really interesting that so much attention has been wrapped up in the primaries and the election. And, I think sort of sadly, Black Lives Matter hasn't gotten as much attention from the left in that conversation as much as it should. But the moment that this uprising was spurred, I have seen a lot of leftist organizations not question Black Lives Matter, but just say, okay, we're in on this. If this is what you want, this is what we're supporting. Showing up to protests with people to be there, showing up to protests with water and food and eye goggles. And I've been really encouraged to see, here in LA, at least, I can speak for I can mention K-Town for All as an organization, the Democratic Socialists of America, Los Angeles Community Action Network. A number of organizations have they're like, okay, this is where you're pointing us, this is where we're going, this is what we're pushing for. There hasn't been this whole ego driven of is this about class or is this about race? It's just we're in this together, like a solidarity network, which I find really encouraging. And I think it really speaks to the approach that these organizers have that is so decentralized, and saying, we're casting a vision and you need to figure out how you're going to participate in that vision or not. And so I think it's interesting, to think, I haven't pulled down a statue, but I'm watching people pull down these statues, and I'm just thinking, I don't know who's leading that, but I do feel like we're on the same team.
Yeah.
And Black Lives Matter didn't say go pull down a bunch of statues, but exactly. It still feels like it's like everybody's participating to inch forward this movement towards defunding the police, towards abolition, and towards a real reckoning of the dire sins of this country, which I can't help but, for the moment at least, have a lot of hope in, just for the opportunity to experience it happening. But again, I think maybe I'm right there with you of what is going to come next that is a little bit fearful, I'm thinking of this, well, actually it's a song by The Last Poets.
Ooh.
That I saw in a Malcolm X documentary the other day, that's talking, man, I shouldn't have even brought this up now. It's going to be so weird to me. That's called N-Words Are Scared of Revolution, I think is what it's called.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
You know the song I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And, the name The Last Poets is to say, we're the last poets before the revolution. And then we don't need poetry. We need people, pulling up arms, and I'm just thinking, I think I'm having that fear, that fear of revolution. What does that actually look like, and am I ready for it? And so I think I'm putting my hopes and my stakes on the leaders and the organizers who I just want to believe know better than me, and I want to be critical, and I want to have a good a critical lens and make sure that I'm calling out the truth that I'm seeing. But I also I want to rely on the hope that we have in community rather than my personal critiques or criticisms or judgments about the movement. I don't know why that all came up, but I'm glad I said it.
I think when we're having these conversations in my head, I'm always trying to think what to call them, and I think they're like freedom discussions.
Yeah.
Because I think that the through line is we're always questioning these systems of oppression, because we're always asking ourselves, what does freedom look like?
Yeah.
And I was tasked with saying a speech that actually didn't happen because we thought we had an outbreak, and we didn't at the facility that I was at. So we had to cancel our Juneteenth celebration. And I still kept the speech, and I use it as an episode, the speech that I wrote.
Oh, I loved the speech. I thought it was so good, man. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. And that speech, honestly, man, it comes from our conversations. I'll be real with you. That's what it comes from.
So good.
That's what it comes from. It comes from these deeper discussions on the the chains that bind us that we just don't talk about or we don't see. And I see the chains of addiction on the people that I deal with, but I also have my own chains that hold me down, that I'm constantly trying to unshackle. Because now I see that they're holding me down, right? And to see, I think let me go back a little bit. I think another thing that these uprisings represent, it isn't just George Floyd, because in the city that he got suffocated in or choked in, keep in mind, Philando Castile got shot in his car on Facebook Live for reaching for his permit.
Yeah.
So it's the same. It's really right across town in St. Paul, I believe that was. And I was expecting this kind of moment after that. And I think you can't get this moment that we're in right now without Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this is a reaction to his presidency and what it has wrought on us. Because we've had corrupt politicians before. We've had Wall Street bailouts. The last president we had, Black people lost more wealth under Obama than they did under Bush Jr.
Wow, I did not know that.
So yeah, because you had the housing crisis and a lot of wealth for middle and working class people is built in their property. You lose your property. So I think a lot of this is the reaction to Trump. Not all of it, but a lot of it.
I think it's a confluence of a number of different things, right? And Trump is inherent and necessary to it. And I think you pile on coronavirus, you pile on just sort of the economic downturn because of coronavirus, and then I feel like another like kind of weird thing that's hard to analyze is that I think with so many people stuck in their homes has really changed our engagement with what's going on Twitter and Facebook, and sharing these videos of people getting killed has been so much more widely spread even than when Philando Castile was killed. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, because
I love the hesitance in your voice. Feel free to.
I'm thinking about the people that we've seen killed, and to me, it doesn't always have to be law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
We saw Philando, and I don't remember if this was during the Trump. I think this was during Trump's ring. The rapper kid, the Triple X, John, whatever. I can't think of his name right now. I'm not trying to butcher it. I don't know him.
I think it was Extension.
Something like that. And, he got killed on I think a live stream of some sort. If it wasn't Facebook, it must have been Instagram. And I don't like the fact that these things become almost common.
Yeah.
Because you never want to get numb to it.
Absolutely.
One of the things that it wasn't a deciding factor, but in the Rodney King case, because that video got played so much, the jury went from crying in the early days when they saw it to ultimately siding with the police at the end.
Yeah.
So I don't want them to make people like unsympathetic to the horror they're literally watching.
Yeah, I saw Angela Davis actually talking about this the other day, and it's a complicated issue because it's like they used to share pictures of lynchings as postcards.
Mm-hmm.
Like people would bring their kids and in a picnic, chair, and like it's like there's some sort of line between like witnessing and sharing in the suffering and then it becoming that sort of exhibitionism. Is
murder
that
porn.
what you're talking to?
Yeah, yeah. It's a scary line, and I don't know where it is.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not going to sit here and lie. I have fallen down the rabbit hole of knockout videos before.
Yeah, right, right.
I'm not going to lie. And when you sit there and you go, okay, I'm watching tragedy right now. People could have concussions, and this isn't funny. And I feel the same way about watching person after person. Like, first it was the story of Breonna Taylor, because there's no video of that, which caught the media's attention, because another thing that's very disgusting. Then you get Ahmaud Arbery's video. Finally, it came out. That's the kid in Atlanta
Uh-huh.
area. And then you get George Floyd, and then people forget about Breonna Taylor.
Yep.
And then you get the other guy in Atlanta at the Wendy's.
Yeah, Rashad Brooks.
Yeah. Then we have, it wasn't a video of it, but you have the kid Botham Jean in Dallas area. Like, was it last year before last, that the cop went in his house, shot him, said, "Oh, I thought it was my house."
Right.
And not only does she get sentenced, but remember, that's the one where the bailiff cries and consoles her.
I know, right? Oh my God. Yeah.
And the judge had cried.
What
Black
do you,
bailiff,
what do
black
you
judge.
think we're speaking to right now?
I'm sorry, say again?
What is it that you think that what are we dancing around in this moment? Like, what are we saying?
My fear is that at some point we start devaluing the life,
Yeah.
and it's almost looking like a movie or a video game.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a dehumanizing aspect sometimes to the ad nauseum view of these images. Like, I've seen that image of that town that lynches those two young men, and they're kind of looking back at the camera. I've seen that image so much,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of don't really see the tragedy anymore,
Damn.
because you see it so much, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's aspects to police violence that we don't really talk about. And I had a friend I have quite a few friends from high school that got into being public defenders or defense attorneys in general. And they had shared this public defender's Twitter a thread. And it was, he had a client that was a young black kid that had been driving on a road, and there was an animal in the middle of the road, and he swerved to miss it. And in swerving to miss it, he hit a mailbox. This was like a small town. And if you drive along these country roads, people have mailboxes. It's hella far from their house, like maybe even an acre from their house. And the kid hits the mailbox. The family had heard it. They got upset. They called police. Police came out, and the police said the kid was reckless driving. He wasn't drunk. He never had a ticket. I think he was like 16 or 17. He had called his parents, and they got him. They didn't have a lot of money. They took all the money they had to get him this lawyer. And the lawyer went and took a picture of the road, because the cop had said that the kid was driving recklessly, per his statement.
Mm-hmm.
Because the lawyer had a picture of the road, and in the road you see where the kid had swerved to miss something, miss obviously an animal. The kid doesn't get convicted and have to pay a fine, and you know, and what the lawyer was trying to say is, like, police violence isn't always an ass whooping.
Oh yeah.
It's the fact that you are not going to be believed, and if you don't have competent people around you, you will feel the full force of the state on your neck.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you're in the system.
Go ahead.
No, I just said, and then you're in the system.
Yeah.
And good luck trying to get out of that system.
Yeah, and that is really bringing to mind Robert Fuller, who's found hanging from a tree in a public square
Mm-hmm.
in Palmdale, and the sheriffs call it a suicide. And it's like, yeah, I see what you're saying. Like, that is police violence.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
police violence. I'm thinking about what you were just saying about like those lives lose not being able to kind of grasp onto the uniqueness of these lives because so many people are being killed.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking right now about the idea of compassion, and and compassion, is two words, two phrases from Latin: calm and passion, which is passion is suffering and calm is with, suffering with. When you have compassion for someone, you're recognizing their suffering and you're suffering with them. And in helping professions, and this is maybe related also for you and your work, like we have this idea of compassion fatigue, that
Yes.
when you are suffering with so many people and so often and sometimes and maybe most of the time, you're just not seeing the outcomes that you're hoping for. And so we start to Ram Dass talks about we start to close our hearts, because, and I might have mentioned this before, because we're afraid that we're trying to keep our hearts open in hell, and that
Mm.
just the amount of pain that we feel will be let in if we leave our hearts open, that it will overtake us and it will be too much. And that is a real tension of when you're working with the folks at your facility, of keeping your heart open. When I'm seeing clients in therapy of how to keep my heart open when I'm hearing some of people's worst moments in their lives,
Yeah.
and it's a real struggle to do that, to watch these videos and not let our hearts get hard, because of our own fear of what might happen to us if we open ourselves to that suffering. But what Ram Dass talks about is that if we stick with it, if we stay in that pain and just observe it and let it wash over us, that what inevitably happens is we are surprised by how resilient we are to our pain and to the pain of others, and that pain doesn't overtake us and it doesn't make us crumble. Instead, it actually can become the fodder, and it becomes the kindling to help us stay in the fight, to stay in that area of compassion. But it takes a lot of effort and takes a lot of courage, because it is so hard to try to remember all these names. It's so hard to see failure of the system over and over and over again. And it's hard to, Angela Davis, we've dropped her name a few times. She's getting a lot of play in this episode.
That's totally fine.
She's been a radical, for how long? Over half a century?
Yeah.
That takes a willingness to live in that suffering, and just to realize that is actually where our freedom lies. I think that that's a lot of what we see in sort of Buddhist literature also, is just this idea that the path to liberation is dependent on our willingness to confront our own suffering. And if we can not turn our eyes away from our suffering, but to sort of abide in it, to experience the suffering and not say, oh, this is bad, but to say, this suffering has a lesson for me. This suffering is a gift that is going to push my life forward, that's going to push me to be with other people, and has it's wisdom, it's a teacher, it's a guru, this suffering that we hold, and not to turn our eyes away from the guru, but to listen when it's hard, is a really, it's fucking hard lesson to internalize. But I think I can't help but think that there's something there, And at the same time, I recognize that I'm speaking from an area of privilege where there's a lot of people who are suffering much more than I am. And it's not my place to say, oh, just keep your chin up. You know? But I think it is my place to say, I see your suffering and it is painful for me and I will suffer with you.
Mm-hmm.
Is that making sense?
No, it makes total sense. I tell people every day, I'm in here with you.
Yeah.
I'm in here with you. I'm not going home to I think some people can go home to a little bit of a nicer place. It's like, hey man, I'm going home. But I tell people like where I was living, they kind of laugh and they go, oh man, like it's better here. It's like, yeah. I'm in here. I'm in here with you 24/7. I'm in here with you.
And isn't that what, I mean, that's just so what people need to hear. You know, when you have shit going on in your life and the last thing you want to hear from somebody is, oh, it gets better, or, oh, you know, have some gratitude for this, that, or the other. What you want to hear is, man, that sucks, dude. That sucks. And I'm feeling that with you. I'm
Mm-hmm.
here with you in it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that's really the work is living in that suffering and letting it be our teacher. Because
And
it's not
that's
the
the
end,
hard
you
part.
know. Even we destroy capitalism and we, you know, institute the dictatorship of the working class, and you know what? People are going to be dying, and people are going to be sexually assaulted, and people are going to be abused. Like suffering is always going to be with us.
It's funny you say that because this guy wrote a book. I can't remember his name, and he used Star Wars as the metaphor
Uh-huh.
that the rebellion failed because at the end of Return of the Jedi, I don't know if you've seen the Star Wars movies.
Yeah.
At the end of Return of the Jedi, you blow up the Death Star, and there's no more Empire, and now we have this kind of this show. I don't know if you've seen the show on Disney, The Mandalorian, which I actually thought was really well done.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but yeah, I know exactly.
It's actually really good. It's actually really good. It's like a space western. Anyway, that's supposed to take place like 6 years after the Empire is destroyed, and you know the new movies are supposed to take place 30 years after the Death Star is destroyed, and you have the same thing,
Right.
right? So there were some failures. This guy, and he's a leftist, and it's one of the Zero books, and it's kind of a funny thing to riff about, and it's definitely you fall down a very nerdy rabbit hole. But to your point about you overthrow capitalism, and if you don't really have a vision of what's next, you can fall right back into whatever you tried to overthrow in the first place.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say to some extent that just is that is the struggle of just being alive, is that we are struggling towards freedom. And the only moment that we really realize it is as we pass. You know, we die, and in that moment of death, all of our suffering falls by the wayside as if it were some sort of dream. And and that's sort of, you know, that's sort of the paradox of struggling towards liberation, is that is it's never fully realized. It's always in contention that it is experienced. You know, that there is the normative white supremacist capitalist structure, and that freedom is to exist outside of that while that same thing is, while it's still in power. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like in the story of Jesus, he's talking about the kingdom is here. He's not saying we got to
Yeah.
wait till the Roman Empire is fallen. He's saying the kingdom is here. You have to live in it, even though the Roman Empire is ruling over you. And I think that's what our struggle is as leftists and as fighters for black liberation, or whatever we want to call ourselves, is that
Mm-hmm.
we will abide in that deep, earnest value within ourselves, even as uh, the systems of power are still in place. How are we doing?
Oh, did you break up? You were breaking up for a second right there, so
Oh,
I didn't
sorry
hear the
about that.
last thing
No,
you
I think
said.
I'm here.
No, 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 no. Hey, man. Again, that speech that I wrote came from conversations that we had. So
Yeah.
I'm sitting back here absorbing all of this free psychotherapy.
Well, I mean, I can't even tell you how I'm just so grateful to have these conversations with you also. I mean, to just be working out what it means to be in this moment of, I mean, we are in very unique times. I don't, I think that there, of course, has been other pandemics. There have been other uprisings, but this seems to be a confluence of things happening within our lifetime that very well might be the something defining. Is this going to define the future of policing? Is this going to define the future of the climate to some extent? Is this going to, there's a lot writing on this, and I think it's so helpful for me to be in conversation, figuring these things out together. And I think that is what that conversation is too, between Black Lives Matter and socialist organizations and advocates for rape survivors, and how do all of these different areas, how do we converse together to have some sort of mutual sense of an idea of freedom? I love that framing.
Speaking of that, coming up next week, I'll have the show aired next week, but I'm interviewing one of the authors of the book, Feminine. Oh, I can't think of the name of the book. The Feminist and the Sex Offender.
Whoa.
And it's about abolishing like sex offense registries and looking at sex offenders and violent criminals in a whole different light.
Wow.
It was a heavy
Definitely
book.
something I could hear more of.
It's going to be an interesting talk. It was a heavy book, but to your point about, again, we're always asking ourselves what freedom looks like, and we have to not view it through the patriarchal white supremacist lens is really, really hard, because that's the lens that defines this country.
Mm-hmm.
So of course we understand, maybe I was too, flippant about statues in the way I framed it. But, of course I understand the importance of taking down these symbols. I totally understand that. My question that I always ask people is, especially because I've had so many people like running for office on of late, is, well, what do we do next? Here we are in this moment of global solidarity. We're seeing protests in numerous countries because they have a lot of similar problems like we have. Black people in the UK have it rough too.
Yeah.
Palestinians, of course they have it rough. They're trying to annex more of those poor people's land.
Yeah.
What is the next step going to be, and how do we keep the movement from being co-opted? And that's kind of where I'm at. Is me personally, I think a lot of it is education. I think a lot of it, especially for Black people, is getting reconnected to the Black left, the Black socialist history. Even in churches, there's been a deep rooted socialist resistance in the Black church that we're just so far removed from because of a co-opting during the civil rights movement of the Black bourgeoisie.
Uh-huh.
So that's kind of where I'm always asking people. I'm always kind of ending the show almost like, okay, so in this moment, what do we do next?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think it's something that it's always going to be in conversation. I think that, it's, I have this bias towards, it's where you're at. There's something to do wherever you are. And I think that that's where that question of what is next has to be, because whoever's listening is where they are. You're in Oakland, I'm in LA. You're on the ground working with folks who are unhoused. I'm advocating for folks who are unhoused. I know people who are unhoused. I have clients there. We have these unique places in what I hope is a revolution. And I think it begins really with connecting, on an eye to eye level of of at your neighborhood council, at your neighbors. You have a neighbor who's hungry.
Yeah.
You have a neighbor who's hungry. You have a teacher who needs school supplies. You have a single mom who does not have who's an essential worker and has no child care. Like it's real and it's tangible, and it's not just about theory, which I think on the left we can always get wrapped up in talking about theory, and instead of talking about people. And so I think
Yeah.
it's really in the footwork. Man, I usually try not to be so religious about things, but I'm just thinking of that whole idea of you know uh, faith without works is dead. Um,
Mm.
that what does it matter if you have read Capital?
Das. Yeah, I was gonna say Das Kapital. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, exactly. If it's not getting worked out in praxis, if it's not getting worked out in your feet, um, and in your neighborhoods, and in exchanging, uh, some bread and some wine, and exchanging some like life energy for one another, I think I think it has to start there, because otherwise we get lost in like, oh, is Biden good or bad? Well, to
Yeah.
some extent, I don't care because Biden doesn't have control over our police force in LA.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. No, I you know what? I agree with you 100%. There is some questions I still want to ask you. I know we're running long on this episode, and I'm going to save those questions for the bonus half. So if you want to hear the other side of these questions that I'm asking Kelvin, and we're going to have another short discussion as long as I got him, sign up to be a patron. It's cheap. It's only $3 a month. It's worth it. You get bonus content. You get merchandise. God, what else do you get? Music. So much. But thank you guys. I'm going to play some music. Kelvin, don't hang up.